Okay, so I'm going to talk about one of the things that I do that I've touched on a little bit in just other videos in general is the fact that I do like old school Hollywood movies. Mostly old school musicals, which is good because the movie that I'm going to talk about today, while it is animated and from 1997, is essentially based on like the typical kind of setup of like an old school Hollywood musical from like the 30s and 40s and stuff like that. And like 50s, 60s type setup. So, today I get to talk about Cats Don't Dance, which came out in 1997. It is an animated movie. One of the non-Disney animated movies was animated by Warner Brothers or Turner Animation at the time. And it's just this fun take on like Hollywood musicals, but there is like heart to it and stuff like that. It's not one of the movies that tends to make people's like memorable ones for like animated movies that are non-Disney, like Anastasia or even the Swan Princess movies or Thumbelina or, you know, The Secret of NIMH or other ones that I've talked about on this list already, you know, All Dogs Go to Heaven, Land Before Time, that type of stuff. But it is a good one, it is a nice one, and I do enjoy it. So, this movie takes place in 1939. The general setting is Hollywood. We are introduced to our two opposing forces in the movie. We are introduced to Darla Dimple, who is this, she's this childhood star, and she's clearly based on Shirley Temple and a different character that we'll get to later. And she is like this America's sweetheart, lover of children and animals, all the stuff. She's, this big star. She has like this huge house that she lives in, and she's got this butler, Max, that waits on her hand and foot and adores her, and all of that stuff. And then we are introduced to Danny, who is this orange tabby cat from Kokomo, Indiana. And it is his dream to make it to Hollywood, where he can then star in a musical, be discovered and star in a musical and everything else like that. That is his intention. He loves singing and dancing and all of this. And he's very good at it. But, as I stated, Danny is a cat. And this is, in this world, it's, animals all are, human level sentience and everything else like that they have described here. And this is a musical, so we get various songs throughout the movie. The songs are all written by Randy Newman. And the first one that we get is just Our Time Has Come, which is just, it's kind of Danny's travel song. He's not singing it, but it's being sung as he is like traveling from Kokomo, Indiana, all the way to Hollywood, California. Just like him seeing, the country along the way. It's like, he's never left his hometown, and now he's on his way to California to go make it big in Hollywood. And then he gets there, and then we get Danny's arrival song, which is him singing about, dancing, all this stuff. We get, throughout the course of this song, we get several glimpses of, like, characterized versions of, like, old school Hollywood stars. Like, we see, like, Laurel and Hardy, and we see, like, Mae West, and, like, some other ones that pop up throughout the course of the song. And there's also just, like, lots of other characters that kind of get glimpsed in this, so it's just kind of fun that way. And Danny makes his way to the Farley Wink Animal Acting Agency, and he makes his way there, and this is where we meet a good chunk of the rest of the cast. We are introduced to Tilly the Hippo, Cranston the Goat, Francis the Fish, and TW a Turtle. These ones are all going to be quite important. There is also a penguin named Pudge that Danny meets as well. And then we are also introduced to Sawyer, who is this beautiful female white cat. And the setup is that all of these animals are also actors. And they want, they worked for the Farley Wink Animal Agency, and they all, are in pictures as various roles where they need animals. And Danny's like super stoked to sign up for this, and there's this movie that they're casting for right now called Little Archangel, which is going to be starring Darla Dimple. So he's just like, oh, this will be great. And I was like, so we need like 2 of every animal. So it's just like, hey, can you play a cat? I am a cat. Good, sign here. And all this other stuff. And we see Sawyer, and Sawyer is actually the secretary / receptionist at the animal acting agency, and she gets roped into having to go be the other cat on the Ark. So all of the animals get sent off to go be the animals on the Ark for this movie. And they get to the studio, and it's a Mammoth Productions is what it is the name of the studio, Mammoth Studios. And they all get there, they're all getting into their costumes and everything else like that, and getting set up. And they're all given their scripts, which is essentially for each of them one line of them saying whatever the characteristic version of what their animal would say. So it's, the cows go moo, the pigs go oink, the birds go tweet, 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 the cat goes meow. And you're probably figuring out where I'm going with this if you've never seen this movie before. If you haven't seen this movie before, why are you watching this review and not going to watch the movie first? Because as much as I can talk about this movie, again, just like a bunch of the other ones, I can't do it justice. Because there's lots of background gags that are going on, and there's other stuff that gets done throughout this that is just stuff that I can't quite point out or explain very well in the context of the review. But go watch it. I'm pretty sure it's available on YouTube. Probably have to pay for it or get ads or whatever, but I believe it's available on YouTube. Or just go watch the musical numbers. Those are fun too. So we then have it where it's like Danny's like, oh, well, I can probably jazz this line up or something, because his intention is that he wants to get noticed. So he wants to jazz up a line so that way he'll hopefully have the director or someone go, oh, that cat's got talent, put him in a picture type of a thing. Give him a bigger role or something like that. Is what Danny wants. And all the other animals, including Sawyer, are like, okay, it's your funeral, essentially. It's like, okay, we're going to have him learn the hard way, I guess. And we also see this for the general personalities for the other animals. Tilly the hippo is very optimistic. Cranston the goat is essentially an old goat. He's grumpy and stuff like that. Frances is this fish, and she is just very sarcastic all over the place. She's great. And then we have TW, who's the turtle. And he is very kind of neurotic a little bit, and he has fortune cookies that he always pays attention to. And then we just have Sawyer, who rounds out the rest of the animal cast. We'll get to another one shortly, but we have Sawyer, and she is more practical and stuff like that. She's like, okay, well, Danny is finding out, unfortunately, the hard way that in Hollywood, it's the humans that are the stars and the animals that are essentially the set pieces, the set dressing. You're not much more important to us than the costumes or the props. And even in some cases, the costumes and the props are more important than you guys are. You guys are here literally to make a pretty background for the actors and actresses, specifically Darla Dimple in this case, to stand in front of or to vaguely interact with. Is essentially what Danny is finding out the hard way, and what the rest of the animals already know. They've been through this. They've been in Hollywood for a while. They've kind of had their dreams beaten down. And a bunch of them trying to stay with acting. And Sawyer's the one who went and got a job at the acting agency as the assistant, because that's what she could do. And everything else like that. So we're kind of seeing this. And Danny decides that he's going to try to jazz his line up a little bit during the musical number so he can try to catch the eye of someone. Note ahead of time, this does not end well. From there, we have it that it is now time for them to start filming, and that means we get to have the big musical number for Darla Dimple. And she comes in and she's, dressed in this adorable little tutu, and she's an angel. And it's, Little Boat on the Sea is the name of the song. And it's just funny. It is essentially her just talking about how the song is just funny because it's supposed to be like a Noah's Ark song. And it's like, oh, the humans were so bad, so the Lord washed away their bad cities and their bad towns, and all of the humans drowned. No. And then it shifts to, but then the animals had, it's like, but then there were the animals, and yes, some of them drowned too. And we see like unicorns drowning, which I'm like, really? Really? You had to do that. And then it's like shifting into like, so I built a little boat. And she's like, big lights come up and we see like the ark that was built. And I was like, where's Noah in this story? How does Noah fit in with this story? But she's like singing and, jumping around on like the high wire that she's on, or not the high wire, the, the high wire. No, that's for High Wire Act. She's swinging around on the ropes that they have, the harness and everything else like that, as she like flies around, and like all the embers are doing what they're supposed to do. They're mooing, they're oinking, they're tweeting, they're barking, whatever they're supposed to. And then it gets to Danny and Sawyer just meows like she's supposed to, and then Danny does a little bit of a flair to it, which Darla kind of notices but keeps going. And then Danny keeps going. He keeps jumping in front of other animals, trying to sing along with Darla, all of this stuff. And it does not go well. And it results in just dead silence of everybody looking at him, and then Darla just going ballistic on him. Which results in her getting dropped into the ground and then raised up and then spun around the studio, which is hilarious. And she screams for Max, who is her butler, her gigantic butler, who's clearly supposed to be a combination of like Frankenstein's monster and King Kong. In all honesty, there's even like references. One of the things that I love about this movie is that so many of the different shots throughout the movie are clearly references to other classic Hollywood movies, and stuff like that. Because like this is supposed to be taking place in 1939. And, like, there's, like, a Wizard of Oz reference in here. There's, like, a King Kong reference in here. There's lots of other references to other, like, Hollywood movies and musicals from that time frame, and other actors and actresses. There's, like, Gone with the Wind references and everything else like that that are going on at that point in time. And one of the places that the movie does show is, like, the Grauman's Chinese Theater, which I have been to because I have been to Hollywood, California. My mom and I went there when I was, like, 11 or something like that, 11, 12, somewhere in that range. And like, we walked around Hollywood and found, all the Hollywood, stars, and went to the Grauman's Chinese Theater. Unfortunately, I don't have any digital pictures of me for when we did that. That was before smartphones were very available, and had good pictures. So, oh well. We have like actual physical pictures, but they're somewhere buried in my mom's room. Technically, I know probably exactly where they are. We just can't get to them. But, so it's like places that I've been here. We've been to Hollywood and stuff like that, and, all that. But, so it's like, I love that this movie has like lots of different references to all of those like old school Hollywood movies at that point in time, like the actors and actresses and stuff like that. That like, kids today, like the kids that were watching this in 1997 were like, I don't understand what any of this is, but it's fun because it's animals singing and dancing and talking and everything else like that. But Darla just explodes, goes ballistic on Danny, and then, torturing the director and everything else like that. And Max comes in, and she's, like, seething and, like, pointing at Danny, and, like, all the other animals abandon him, and Max just, like, picks up Danny. And it's, like, being picked up like King Kong, essentially. And he's like, how does the kitty go? Yeah. Very good. And then just, like, pops Danny, and he just falls to the ground. Again, cartoon logic. And then Max just, like, vanishes. which is funny. And, you know, they continue to film, and, like, Danny is just, like, kind of traumatized at that point in time, which is fair. From there, we then end up cutting to the end of the day where the other animals, the rest of the group are kind of, like, a little bit making fun of Danny. They're just straight up making fun of him with, you know, like, you know, pretending to sing and dance the way that he had been singing. And they, you know, Danny kind of takes it kind of hard, and he goes and sits down, and, like, Danny had, like, this, like, big master plan that he was going to work out. It was, like, go to Hollywood on Monday, 2, Tuesday, get agent, 3, get a role, you know, blah, 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 all of that by the end of the week, to try to get, like, a big starring role in a movie and everything else like that. I'm, like, bit optimistic there, but sure, keep that up. So Danny's a little, you know, set back by this. But he doesn't take it too hard, and, like, him and Pudge kind of bond and stuff like that by dancing around. And Sawyer kind of comes over, and she's like, that's the thing here, Danny, is, like, the Hollywood is for people. Animals are just essentially, like, the set dressing. We don't get second chances to a degree. And what ends up happening is, you know, then Danny and Pudge end up hearing this music, and they go over, and they find this, like, just little trailer that's on the set. And they look inside, and they see this elephant playing the piano. Now, Mammoth Studios, very similar to how, like, MGM had, like, the lion that would roar at the beginning of all of the movies. Mammoth Studios has a mammoth that is essentially an elephant in disguise with, like, fake tusks and, you know, a wig. You know, at the beginning of their movies. And we meet Wooly, you know, that is the mammoth. That's the elephant that plays the mammoth. And he is, you know, this very sophisticated, like, British elephant and everything else like that. And, you know, he's playing the piano, and, like, Danny and Pudge are very impressed. And then he, like, finds them, and they all interact. And, he's like, yeah, I came to Hollywood to, like, write music, but all they wanted me for is to wear that, you know, beastly tusks and that, you know, wig. But, you know, it's a paycheck. It keeps me going type of a thing. Is what they're aiming for there. So, from there, what we end up having is, like, they're discussing stuff. And Danny's like, well, what about all the others who came here? You know, what happened to them? And, you know, Wooly kind of points, and we see pictures of, you know, Cranston and Fanny and T.W. and, you know, Tilly, and, like, how they, you know, they all came to Hollywood with, like, big dreams of acting in the movies and everything. And how that just got crushed. Just, like, crushed into the pavement because of everything working against them. And then we see that Sawyer was one of them as well, and that it was, you know, she could dance like nobody and she could sing like an angel. And Danny's just kind of, like, blown away by that. So he comes up with this plan of, like, well, why don't we remind them why they came here in the first place? So they come up with this plan. And the next day, you know, when all the various animal actors are gathered after they've kind of all, you know, okay, there's no roles for you guys, go home today, I just need the wildebeest, essentially. Like a Tarzan reference there, so that just throws that in there for, like, other movies that were going on at the time. And what ends up happening is, you know, Danny shows up, and Danny and Pudge show up, and they start, you know, trying to, like, you know, rally the other animals, get them to, you know, spark something in them, and, like, you know, with them and with Wooly playing the piano and, like, everything else like that, and Pudge playing, like, the makeshift, you know, trash can drums, and, you know, Danny dancing around and singing. It gets the animals all kind of, you know, riled up, and they all start singing and dancing and playing and, you know, all this other stuff, you know, just them all having fun and everything. And it's, you know, the animal jam session, and, like, Danny's singing about and everything like that. And, like, reminding him, kind of, like, you know, reigniting a little bit of that spark that they all used to have. And, like, so they're doing all that. And then, so, like, they're having fun. And then, like, Sawyer hears this in the office at the agency, and she makes her way out because she's curious, and then she makes her way there. which is funny. There's lots of animal puns throughout the course of this movie, which is just funny. And like, so they make their, she makes her way there. And then her and Danny kind of end up having a little bit of like a dance off, where it's like, them dancing back and forth and everything like that. And it's lots of references to like the Hollywood, dancing and singing, like, Busby Berkeley or like other stuff like that at the time, for like them dancing about and everything else like that, up and down a ladder and like, trying to one up each other and what they can do and everything. And while that's going on, we have Darla, who's sitting in her trailer with Max as he, like applies like, the beauty cream and everything else like that. And then they hear the music and they make their way outside. And she's like sitting there like, oh, aren't they just adorable, the little animals and everything else like that. And she has already clearly stated earlier in the movie when she blew up at Danny, that she hates animals. But, that's her image, is that she loves animals because that's a better image for her to have. And she's like not happy with the fact that the animals are, like they're having fun and like they actually have some talent and like they're singing and the dancing and everything else like that. And she's feeling very threatened by this. So the animals kind of finish up their little jam session, and Danny, Sawyer kind of goes back to kind of being her more sad, more serious self. And Danny's like, well, what if I could get you an audition with L.B. Mammoth, who is the head of Mammoth Studios. We'll get to him in a little bit. It's like, what if I could get you an audition with him? And she's like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen, essentially. And she's like, it's, we've all had our dreams die on us here. And he's like, well, not a few minutes ago. You seem to be pretty, excited in your dream a few minutes ago. And she just heads off, and all the others head off too. So Danny's trying to figure out what he can do to, do this. Maybe try to get an audition with L.B. Mammoth. And of course, Darla and Max are listening in on this. And Darla is like, Max, invite that little kitty to tea. And like we cut to Darla's house, and Danny's arriving there. And she keeps getting his name wrong. Donald, Dennis, Dino, Desi, all the stuff that's not actually his name. And, she's trying to play the whole, I'm so sorry for what happened the other day with Max, bad Max. And, like all this other stuff, she's like trying to, clearly be like the sweet little, actress that she's supposed to be. That's her portrayal to the world. When she's, being quite passive-aggressive, like she's got animal crackers that she's, like, biting the heads off of and then, like, kind of chucking them at Danny. And she's like, oh, come on, Danny, there has to be something I can do for you as an apology for what Max did. Isn't there a certain someone at a certain studio that I could introduce you to? And, like, we just see, like, her mask is just, like, her veneer, her mask is just, like, slowly starting to, like, crack throughout the course of this. And Danny's like, well, I mean, would it be possible for you to get us an audition with, like, L.B. Mammoth? Would that be possible? And she's like, L.B.? Oh, of course I can do that. That's not a problem at all. How about this? How about you guys all do a musical number? All you animals do a musical number in my little Archangel movie. And we do that. And I'll even give you full use of my arc and my studio and the effects and everything else like that. You do that. And we'll have it that LB shows up there. I'll ask him to come here and then come there. And then you guys come, do this big performance when we get there. And then, he'll see how talented you are, is, her plan. And he's like, okay, that'll be great. And she's like, but you have to make sure that it's big and loud. And she goes into this big, this Hollywood musical number production of, you got to make it big and you got to make it loud and everything else like that. And so we get all that, and it's like this great musical number that we get here. And like all the stops are pulled out. There's dancers, there's a giant cake, there's costume, all this stuff. And like just Darla just like being the star of this. And then Danny is just like by the end of it. And she's like, yeah, just make sure that it's big and loud. And she like sends him off. make sure that there's the press conference. So it's going to be happening at like 3 o'clock on, Friday or whatever it is for the press conference. And then we get this flip. And we get Darla's villain song, which is awesome. And it's big and loud again, but they have like shifted the tone, and it's not cheerful and joyful and hopeful and everything else like that. They have shifted the tone, and it is some of the same lyrics, but then it's like shifted and it's much more villainous and threatening and everything else like that. And it's like her descent into madness is like what's going on. And like, so we're doing all of that. And, she's talking about how she's going to have like Sawyer and Danny just like fall. They're going to fall big and they're going to fall loud and it's going to be horrible. And then like the end of the song is like Max like attaching like electrodes essentially to like her like jumper cables to her curls, and then like sends volts of electricity through her hair, I guess. And like, just like it goes great. Just like the flip of the switch that happens for that song is great. I love it. They do such a good job with that one. And so it's like clearly, it's like this is fully like, Darla is the villain of this piece. We cut to next day or whatever, and it's time for, all the animals are on the set, they're all in their costumes, all getting ready, rehearse their musical number and everything else like that, to show LB Mammoth what they can do and everything. And they're all ready, and like Sawyer shows up and she's like, I don't know how you talked me into this, but okay. And they're all ready, and that's inside the studio. Outside the studio, we are introduced to LB Mammoth, who is, of course, the head of Mammoth Studios. He is supposed to be based on Louis B. Mayer, who was the head of MGM, who had a ton of his own problems, his own issues with how he would treat stars, think Judy Garland and other actors and actresses like that, because back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, lots of different actors and actresses were under contract at studios, and that meant either contracts with studios or contracts with certain directors, depending on stuff. And, it's like, okay, you work for us for this many years, and we'll pay you this much, and we'll have these movies in the works, and then we'll make these movies and all of that type of stuff. And, you'll work with, like, this actress and this actor and this actress and this actress and then this other actor over here. And, we'll do this type of stuff. And so it's like they kind of had, like, the studio film system that they would do. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that led to a lot of issues for the actors and actresses. Like, Judy Garland is one of the ones who had a lot of problems with that. They were very restrictive on her diet. You can read a bunch of stuff about that, and stuff that happened with, like, The Wizard of Oz, how they were very restrictive and controlling on her diet and who she was allowed to be seen with. And they had her on a lot of uppers to keep her going for like long shoots and keep her, peppy and happy and everything else like that, which unfortunately led to a lot of problems later in her life. And eventually her premature death. And so, you get to see that. Like, a lot of actors and actors went through this. I mean, like, it's not a whole lot. I mean, like, there are actors and actresses today, obviously, that go through very similar things. And singers and stuff like that go through these types of very stressful situations where they don't have the best support system because either their parents are essentially using them to get money, to make money, so they're not as worried about like the studios being as abusive of them, or they're just not noticing it, or they're hiding it really well. And the same thing happens nowadays, so it's not like these are new problems. Unheard of problems to us. There's lots of stuff about different, movie executives and CEOs and directors and stuff like that were very abusive and controlling to their stars. Or your music producers and different things like that. That were, TV producers, different things like that were very abusive and controlling to their stars. And the way that they present LB Mammoth here is they don't go quite that far, but he's supposed to be this parody of Louis B. Mayer. And then, of course, we have the director of the movie, Flanagan, who's the director of Little Archangel, and they're giving this interview. about, like, how they make a Darla Dimple movie, about how, everything that goes into making this Darla Dimple movie. And while that is happening, inside of the studio, all the animals are in the Ark waiting for their, debut. And Darla and Max have essentially taken over the control of all the special effects. They are just making it rain gallons and gallons and gallons and whatever is bigger than a gallon, and water liters, I don't know. Just into the studio, and like thunder and lightning going on around the studio, and wind and all this other stuff. And essentially, like, the studio floods, and then they open the door, and then it crashes into the press conference where, LB Mammoth and Flanagan, the director, are like swept up in this on the ship as on the Ark as it is like sailing past. And essentially what ends up happening is it ends up resulting in Danny and Sawyer fighting while trying to steer the ship, which doesn't go well. Tilly is trying to be very positive and trying to introduce LB Mammoth to all of the others, which isn't going well. And they are essentially crashing into all of these other studios, like costume departments and other, filming studios and props departments and like all this other stuff, and just causing a ton of damage all over Mammoth Studios. And by the end of it, Louis B. Mammoth, or LB Mammoth, not Louis B. Mammoth, LB Mammoth, essentially fires all of the animals. Like, you will never work in this town again. And they head off, he throws them all out of the studio, including Wooly, who is his spokesmammoth. Sends them all out of the studio. And, like, Danny is just like, but it wasn't their fault. It was my idea. He was, like, trying to take the blame so the others don't have to be in trouble. I know all about that. And what ends up happening from there... Oh, the sun came out. Let me adjust my shade. Brenda's annoyed because I closed the shade. I had to. It makes my face not look good in the shadows. And so all the animals are angry, sad about what's happening. And then Darla pulls up in her limo with Max. She drops Pudge out the window because they kind of, captured Pudge. And she's like, oh, thank you for working with me, Danny. And then she, like, drives off. And they're like, Sawyer chews about. She's like, Darla Dimple was your little angel. She's the one who set you up. And she's like, she said she wanted help. And it is this naivety coming in from Danny's perspective of, like, Sawyer and the others, like, they are well aware of the fact that Darla hates animals and hates children, even though that's what she's, like, portrayed to love of, lover of children and animals. And, and they are well aware of the way that she is and the way that the studio system is set up. And Danny has this naivety coming into it of like, well, she said she wanted to help type of a thing. And it's just like, no. And so, like, all the animals are just furious and sad. And, like, they all storm off. And Danny, Wooly essentially says, why don't you, if you're going to, if this is, is essentially kind of like tells Danny to go home. This town wasn't made for fellows like you and me. And we cut to, like, this diner where we see all of the other animals, the main group of animals are all just like, they're just, like, sitting there drinking their tea or their coffee or whatever and just, like, complaining about Danny and everything else like that. And Sawyer goes outside, and now we get Sawyer's song, and this is the Tell Me Lies song. And it's her talking about, like, the lies that Hollywood tells, and also just, like, Danny coming in and trying to be, like, this bright light, and, all this other stuff. And it's a great song. And it's, it's like her, it's like the whole sad girl in the rain with the umbrella type of a song. A little bit of a reference to, like, Singing in the Rain there, although this would have been prior to Singing in the Rain, but we'll find out why there's that connection in a little bit. A bit later. So she's, singing this, and we're cutting back and forth between where she is and where Danny is, and Danny's packing up his stuff and getting ready to leave. And, Sawyer finishes singing, and she's like, well, she's kind of like made her, kind of talked herself into maybe what Danny was doing wasn't so bad. Until he points out that it was like, well, you can always catch him at the bus stop. So Sawyer heads off to try to catch Danny at the bus stop. Danny has gotten on the bus and he's on his way to get back to Kokomo, Indiana. Also, for a Nebraska reference, there was a funny thing during the Big and Loud song where Darla says Kokomo, Nebraska, and then Danny, corrects her, which is just funny. I'm like, don't think I've ever heard of a town called Kokomo, Nebraska. Second of all, there's a lot of towns in Nebraska that I probably haven't heard the names of, or if I have, it wouldn't register. Although we do have a town called Beaver Crossing, which is just funny. And, so Danny's, like, on the bus, and, like, the bus driver is, like, kind of, like, talking down about the animals and stuff like that. And Danny kind of, he, like, looks out the window and he sees Pudge. He sees Pudge, who's, like, wandering the streets, and he's, like, sees, like, the, billboard for the Little Archangel, and he comes up with this great plan. And he stops the bus, and he runs off, and he finds Pudge, and he explains his plan to Fudge. While that was going on, Sawyer had found Danny's list sitting at the bus stop of all the things that he wanted to do. And she, like, holds on to that along with his hat. And then what happens is Danny then secretly invites Sawyer along with the rest of their friends to the premiere of Little Archangel. He secretly does this, so they show up there, and at the premiere, it's like this, setup of, like, it's at the Grauman's Chinese Theater, and, like, we have Darla there, and she's, getting her handprints and feet prints and, like, signature there and everything else like that. Like they have at Grauman's Chinese Theater. That was fun to go see. When I was there a good 20 years ago. God. 19, 20 years ago at that point. And what ends up happening is, of course, like, we see, like, all these different, stereotypical types of, like, these Hollywood characters getting out of the cars that are based on, like Joan Crawford and W.C. Fields and Clark Gable and stuff like that as they pop out, and then, Louis B. Mayer shows up, or L.B. Mammoth shows up, and everything else like that. Yeah, you get the why I make that slip of the tongue there. And all of that stuff. And what ends up happening is, of course, they're all inside and they're all watching the movie, and, like, the rest of the animals have shown up, and they're like, why are we even here watching this movie? This is horrible. And it's not it's not a good movie. We just have Darla up on the up in the balcony, just, like, stuffing her face with candy and popcorn and everything. And Danny and Pudge are backstage getting everything ready, so that way they can do the big performance. And, like, they know that the other animals are there, and unfortunately Max ends up hearing them, and Max makes his way down to behind the stage, behind the screen, where he ends up terrorizing Danny and Pudge, and eventually he ends up chasing Danny onto the roof, where then Danny and Max end up climbing all over this giant Darla Dimple balloon that is there, and it results in essentially Danny popping the balloon via its nose on one of the points on the Grauman's Chinese Theater. And there's the great bit that they have it where it's like the balloon is, like, just ready to pop, and needs just a little more force to pop it, and he's got, like, Max has, like, him pinned, and then Max realizes the precarious situation that he's in, and Danny goes, how does the kitty go? And Max goes, meow. Just terrified. And then Danny pops the balloon, and then Max just gets sent flying on the balloon as he just flies away, which is funny. And then, like, Danny has to hurry up and get back inside because the movie is done and they don't want everybody to leave. So Danny, like, hurries back inside, adjusting his clothes as he goes because he got kind of messed up by fighting Max. He gets inside, jumps on stage, and he's like, okay, everybody, yes, he does, like, this big speech where he's, like, trying to, like, make it seem like Darla is allowing them to be there, and she, of course, has to try to play along. They're like, yes, yes, of course I did this, yes, type of a thing. And she's just like, you can see her just like sanity going away. And like Max isn't showing up because Danny defeated Max, so Max can't show up to help Darla. He's flying away on a balloon shaped like her, which is funny. And, so we see that. And, what ends up happening is Danny is like, yeah, we're going to do this big performance for you and everything else like that. And, the rest of the animals, except for Tilly and Sawyer, were like ready to leave. But like Tilly grabbed the other ones and like dragged them backstage along with, Sawyer and Wooly all went backstage with them. And Danny essentially does like this like rousing speech for them, which is like, but you guys stuck around. Yes, I know that you've been through so much, but you guys stayed because you always loved that feeling that you got when you danced or when you sang or when you acted or when you play or whatever. And you stayed because you love that feeling. And you wanted it to keep going. You didn't want it to end. And now this is your chance. And, so it's like it's this, convincing, rousing speech. And they're like, okay. And they all jump on stage and they all start or like Danny jumps on stage and then Sawyer comes out and starts singing. Like this is, I think, the first time he hears her sing and he's just amazed. And like they keep going. And, like, Darla is like, oh, this isn't good. So she, like, sneaks off, and she's, like, in the background, backstage, like, trying to flip close curtains, open curtains, flip switches, all this other stuff, trying to, like, sabotage them. But it keeps making it better because it keeps adding special effects to what is going on. And it just, inadvertently is, like, enhancing the performance as they are all jumping around and singing and dancing and just having a whole lot of fun with like what's going on. And like we see all of them are up on stage going back and forth and singing and dancing and just all this other stuff. And one of the things that she does is like she gathers up a bunch of like colored bulbs and then she's like dumping them, dropping them, trying to have like Danny and Sawyer like step on them. And I think that's supposed to be a reference to, it's a movie called Holiday Inn. It stars Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire. And it's actually the movie where the song White Christmas actually comes from. It is an Irving Berlin musical. It was made before the movie White Christmas. And Fred Astaire's character in the movie for like the 4th of July, like his character needs to do like this dance on stage, and he ends up grabbing these like the firecrackers and like he keeps lighting them and like dropping them on the stage and like dancing around them. And I think this moment here is supposed to be a reference to that, even though technically like in the movie that's taking place before that happens, because like Holiday Inn takes place in like the 1942, I think, because it's like right before World War II, for like right before America joins World War II, because like Pearl Harbor happened during the filming of the movie, type of a thing. So it's like 1943 or something like that is like when the movie comes out or something. But like, so it's like a reference to that, I think, like them just dancing around and like it just getting bigger and bigger, and like Darla, just her efforts are just so fruitless. And eventually, as she's like going, she finds the giant switch that says "Granddaddy of all switches," and like she climbs this switch wall, setting off other things as she goes. And then she like finally, makes pulls the giant switch, and it just, again, fruitless at first, sets off fireworks, and a giant Statue of Liberty, and cannons, and other stuff that just make it just even better, making the animals' performance just a complete success. And like by the end of it, like they're just like, it was like a great performance, and like the audience is like blown away, and they like blow the roof off the theater, literally. And then the audience just like applauding like they've never seen anything like this before. And then Darla has like crawled her way on stage, and there's like a mic right next to her, and she's like, stupid animals, I should have drowned you all when I flooded the stage. And like that reverberates around the theater, so everybody hears it. and then she tries to be sweet and innocent, and then Pudge just opens a trap door, and the sandbag that has, like, attached itself to Darla falls through the trap door, and so does she, which is just funny. And then Flanagan, the director, and Louis B. Mammoth, L.B. Mammoth, come out, and they're like, okay, these kids are gonna be big, and they just, come out, and they're just, like, having all of the, they do, like, this big picture with, like, all of the animals and everything else like that, because it's just like, okay, animals do have star power type of a thing. And then we cut to Darla is, like, asking for Mac's help, and then we cut to, like, Max has somehow made it all the way to Paris on the balloon, and he's just, like, flying, and he can't get back to her. And then we get the end of the last song, which is Our Time Has Come, which is, same one at the beginning of the movie. But while this is happening, we now have it that, like, all, the animals are now going to be able to get the roles that they want, the roles that they have worked so hard to be able to have. And what ends up happening is, of course, we get these references because they, like, have all of these different movie posters that keep popping up. And each of the movie posters is a reference to, like, some other famous movie poster. Like, there's Singin' in the Rain, and there's Casablanca, and The Mask, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and The Witches of Eastwick, and Grumpy Old Men, and Superman, and Beetlejuice, and Twister, and Batman and Robin, and Free Willy, which is Free Tilly. And it's just like, but they all have the animals as, like, the stars of the movie. So it's, like, showing what the animals can do and everything else like that. So they do, like, a great way great fun thing that way. He's like, I had to adjust. So they have that, and they're showing all of these movie posters showing that the animals are having just amazing success and everything, and that stuff's just getting better and better. And then they have it that, like, the last scene is Darla, and she's lost her reputation because it's in the gutter, and she's, like, putting up the poster, putting up the end title posters, and then falls and, like, wraps around her. So she's dead, or not dead. She's not dead. She's gone. She's not in Stardom anymore. And then we cut to, and then we have the end of the movie, which has all the end credits, and the end title card is actually dedicated to Gene Kelly, who, if you're not familiar with him, he is, just this amazing singer and dancer, performer that was in so many different classic Hollywood musicals. He's Singin' in the Rain. He has that sequence, along with so many other amazing movies that he was in and performances that he did. And the movie is dedicated to Gene Kelly, who passed away, who was 1912 to 1996, so he passed away just before the movie was completed. And he is actually as, like, the choreography consultant for the movie, although it's uncredited. And, because it's like they wanted it to be, like, old school classic Hollywood type dancing and stuff like that kind of setup there. So they had him as, like, the consultant for that. And he passed away before it was finished, but he got to have a lot of, input in how they were doing that, which I think is great. And then we get into the voice cast. So, first of all, we have Danny, and he is voiced by Scott Bakula. And if you don't know who that is, he's Dr. Samuel Beckett from Quantum Leap. He is also Captain Archer, I believe, from Star Trek Enterprise. And he's just been in a lot of other roles as well. And, when I was a kid watching this movie, I'm going to point this out. It has been at least 15, maybe 20 years or so. Maybe not quite that long, but somewhere between 15 and 20 years since I have watched this movie. And when I was a kid watching this movie, I would not have known who any of these people were, let alone who Scott Bakula was, or who Gene Kelly was, watching this movie. But when I was looking up the cast for this movie for my notes, I was, like, looking at this and I'm like, wait a second, Scott Bakula is Danny? How did I not know that? And then I'm like, wait a second, did he provide the singing voice too? And he did. I'm like, I didn't know Scott Bakula could sing. So I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know that. So my mind was blown by that. But Scott Bakula as Danny. And then we have Jasmine Guy as Sawyer. And then the singing voice for Sawyer is Natalie Cole, who is Nat King Cole's daughter. And she does an amazing job as Sawyer's singing voice in the movie. Whenever the Tell Me Lies, and then the Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, which is the song that the animals perform at the end of the movie at the theater. She's, that's her singing. And then we have Matthew Hyardine as Pudge as the penguin. And then we have Ashley Peldon as Darla Dimple, and she is, of course, this kind of combination of Shirley Temple and Norma Desmond. Shirley Temple, a lot of people know who Shirley Temple is, child star and everything else like that. All that. Norma Desmond is actually a character from a play and movie called Sunset Boulevard, where she is this actress who had been very famous during like the silent film era. And then she essentially ends up kind of going downhill because she couldn't quite make it work in the talkies. And she has this great line where she's like, it's like, I was big. It was the films that got small type of thing. And she's just like, in the movie or in the show, she has like very much gone downhill. And, like, she has, like, her loyal butler, who is Max is based on, and, like, a bunch of that stuff. So, Norma Desmond is just a perfect one to have combined with Shirley Temple for this role that they have her in. And even throughout the movie, so many of the outfits that, like, Darla wears are based on either Shirley Temple or Norma Desmond for how she is dressed, which is just funny. For like that type of classic old school, kind of references there. There is a musical version of Sunset Boulevard that was written by, I think it was Andrew Lloyd Webber, who did the musical version of it. That uses the movie as like a template for it. So there's that. And the singing voice is Lindsay Ridgway, performs Darla's singing voice, does a great job. Then we have Katie Najimy, I apologize, as Tilly. We have John Ray Davies as Wooly the Mammoth. John Ray Davies is, I believe he's Gimli in Lord of the Rings. So for reference there. He's also in the Indiana Jones movies as like Indiana Jones' friend who's like in Egypt. Who helps with a lot of that stuff in the first movie, in the second movie, and then he shows up again in the fifth movie for the most recent one. He's also in the Princess Diaries Royal Engagement as, like, the bad guy, so there's that. He's great. And, of course, as I said, Wooly the Mammoth is this, a parody of, MGM Studios, Leo the Lion. Then we have Betty Lou Gerson as Frances, who is the fish. And this, I believe, was her last role before her death. And then we have Hal Holbrook as Cranston the goat. Don Knotts as T.W. Turtle. George Kennedy as L.B. Mammoth. And Frank Welker as Farley Wink, who's the human agent for the animals. Don't really recognize any of the other actors' names here for major roles, but yeah. So as I said, I do love this movie. It doesn't rank for me as high as like a bunch of the other ones that I've talked about or that I will talk about, but I still very much enjoy this movie. Watching it and stuff like that. And it had been so long since I've seen it, and yet I still remember so many of the movie beats, of the story beats for it, which is just nice. So that's what I have here. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I encourage you to go watch stuff from like old school Hollywood. Singing in the Rain is amazing. Anything with Fred Astaire, and I am a little biased because he is from Nebraska, or Gene Kelly. different ones like those. Just like go and watch those. They are so good for the singing and the dancing and, you know, the acting and stuff like that. And like the sets that they go to and stuff like that are just great. So that's what I have. I thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.